Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Fabio Rivera, the Program and Events Coordinator at the PGA. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome you to this Q&A today with the producers of We Feed People, Sara Bernstein and Justin Wilkes. Before we get started, we'd like to say a quick thank you to Disney and Nat Geo Documentary Films for making today's panel possible. Leading this conversation today is Brian Welk, a senior film reporter at The Wrap who recently won a New York Press Club Award for his three-part series on deaf actors in Hollywood. Welk joined The Wrap in 2016 and is a graduate of Indiana University at Bloomington with a master's degree in art journalism from the University of Southern California. Brian, thank you for being here, and I'll turn this over to you.
Thank you. And thank you, Justin and Sara, for both joining me today. I'll also remind everyone that this film comes from Imagine Documentaries and Nat Geo Documentary Films, and it is nominated for 2 Emmys, including Outstanding Documentary or Nonfiction Special and Outstanding Cinematography for a Nonfiction Program. So thank you both so much for joining me. And again, congratulations on this film.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
So I think from my first question is really from the producing standpoint. You guys are sending Ron Howard into the heart of the storm, literally in many instances. Not just the director of your film, but also your boss. And I mean, what are the things you have to really keep in mind and plan ahead when you're sending not just your director, but many crew into really dangerous conditions? I mean, I think for me, what I loved about this film is that sense of urgency. Like they are there in really dangerous conditions. So, I mean, Justin, let's start with you. What were some of those conversations that you had in really trying to make sure, how do we keep people safe and how do we tell this story in the best way possible?
No, look, it's a good question. It's paramount. I mean, to any kind of project we get involved in, especially something like this, which, as you said, you literally have crews that are on the front lines. It's interesting, we made a movie that Ron directed called Rebuilding Paradise, also with National Geographic about 2 years ago, and it was about the fires in Paradise, California, and the aftermath of that. And Ron, from when that fire first broke out, called us up, and his instinct was we need to be on the ground. We need to actually see what's going on. We need to meet the people who are impacted by that. And I think that that's true in all the work that he's done as a filmmaker, even his narrative work. It's very much about people. And he saw the need and the necessity to be there on the ground. And within the first few days of that fire, he literally was there walking through the ashes. And that really stuck with him. And it was actually through that film that he met Jose Andres, because Jose and World Central Kitchen were there on site at Paradise feeding people who had lost their homes, feeding first responders. And although they had met sort of in passing at various events and fundraisers, it was the first time that he saw Jose in action and saw the way that the community really came out in support of Jose. And it was truly inspiring. And I think that planted a seed. And then not too long after that, Jose sort of challenged Ron with, can you capture what my organization does? Now we had the benefit of his organization, Jose's organization, having had filmed many of their past activations. And it was sort of a similar story where often somebody would go to film Jose and his team in action, and they would be so moved by what they saw, they would put their cameras down and they would join the organization. So many of the people that are actually working for him and with him also are cinematographers and directors and kind of handy with the camera. So we had the benefit of a lot of that footage. And then we also started to film for ourselves, which, Ron went out in the field and our other producers went out in the field. And it's always a challenge. But I think what we saw with World Central Kitchen, the goal was never to put ourselves directly in harm's way. I think for them, it was about where can we set up and mobilize so that when this event passes, if it's like a tornado, let's say, or a hurricane, we have the ability to actually feed people, right? We have the ability to actually set up and mobilize. And that's really what we concentrated our cameras on.
I mean, then, or Sara, if you have anything to add to that.
No, I mean, the one thing I will say is, it was sort of interesting that, as Justin said, we did have the luxury of this wealth of archive that the organization had filmed for, over almost a decade, right? And especially when we found ourselves dealing with COVID and production was shut down, like many productions for a little while, and we sort of had to recalibrate. And Ron had to recalibrate, what is this film? Is it, originally, I think in his mind, he felt much like Rebuilding Paradise. We were going to jump in with one activation that World Central Kitchen was implementing, and really follow it through. And I think COVID, at first made that rather challenging. So it was great to be able to look at this archive of footage, and then for Ron and the rest of us to really, understand that we could actually create a film that really charted the evolution of World Central Kitchen and Jose's mission, from a very kind of small, scrappy grassroots group, many of whom, like Justin had implied, were actually filmmakers, which is sort of interesting. Some of the key people who you see in the film, like Sam Block, like Nate Mook, sort of joined the organization at first because they were just going to document. So it's interesting how they sort of mobilize, much like documentary filmmakers, I would say. And that's sort of how the organization kind of ran for a while, which is, let's just get on the ground. Let's see what has to be done. Let's galvanize the local restaurant industry, whether it's in the Bahamas or Puerto Rico or wherever it might be, and try to, feed people. So it's interesting how, as documentary producers, and certainly Ron as documentary director, how you have to be really flexible, because sometimes the story that you think you're going to tell is not the story that ultimately you wind up following.
I mean, then let's back up and find out, what was it about Jose and about World Central Kitchen that made you realize that there is a larger film here beyond some of the stories we've seen on the news, or some of the companion pieces that, World Central Kitchen has put out. What was your process in really developing this into a feature? I mean, if you have this wealth of footage as well, I'm sure that's a good sign. And but where was the through line of we want to make sure this is, that there's actually a story here, something new that we can touch on.
Well, I think like Sara said, there was such a wealth of verite in the archive to begin with. And with any sort of purely verite film, you really look to the archive, or you look to what the ongoing story is to figure out what the film might be. And in the beginning, we didn't quite know. I think what drew us to it was that, one, you have this subject in Jose who is so larger than life and so charismatic. And we had, the pleasure of meeting him a few times at the beginning. And he just pulls you in with that enthusiasm. And it really makes you feel that anything is possible, which is usually the exact opposite feeling you have when you're sitting at home watching one of these events unfurl on your TV set. You feel helpless, right? You see a hurricane happening in the South, or you see an earthquake happening in Latin America, or a fire. Your first instinct is, wow, that's awful, but what can I do? I'm sitting here on my butt watching television most of the time. So what Jose rallies you to feel is, no, get off your butt and come with me, and we can actually do this. And while his organization has this incredible group of core staff, it's mostly made up of volunteers, mostly from the areas that are impacted, but then also people who fly around the world or, across the country to support it. And so in making the movie, like Sara said, his organization is almost like a scrappy documentary production company in a way, because they don't take no for an answer. They're incredibly malleable. And you see in the film how he can just cut through the red tape, which in a way is like cutting through the Hollywood process of trying to make a movie, when everyone tells you no every step of the way. And every bureaucracy tells you can't serve people here, you can't bring food there. He's like, well, why not? I can just get the food. I'll get the food and I'll just make it. And you're like, yeah, like you can do that. And there's just something very, very inspiring about that. And that's, I think, for Ron and for us in the filmmaking team, we latched onto that, and we thought, what is the best vehicle to be able to tell that story? Which is why the film begins as a bit of a history of World Central Kitchen and through the archive how it started, but then it very much comes up to real time, where now he's in the Ukraine.
Right. And I also think what of course always makes for a good documentary, as Justin said, is the subject itself. And I think, and your main kind of subjects, right? Like who's going to take you through this. And I think what is also really fascinating about this documentary is you see the evolution of an organization, but you also see the evolution of Jose. So you see Jose at the beginning kind of as an entrepreneur, he just jumps in, as Justin said, gets on the ground, what can we do? Who can we call to help us? Not thinking about red tape or bureaucracy. And then, of course, you see him evolve into a true activist throughout the course of the film, where World Central Kitchen almost overshadows his restaurateur kind of business and his own sort of entrepreneurial ventures. And then by the end of the film, you see him in World Central Kitchen essentially becoming advocates. And you see them really kind of pushing the charge in Washington, and you see them moving into food policy. And as Justin said, you see them right now in the Ukraine, and they were really one of the first relief organizations to be on the ground, to stay on the ground. As of now, I think they are serving, 1.8 million meals a day.
Wow.
And they've been doing that consistently now for almost, for 5-6 months. It's pretty incredible.
It is remarkable in the film to see how pragmatic and just clear cut he is as a leader, and the idea that he just gets it. We're just, it just makes sense. We're just going to do it. And the idea that food can actually, it's not just, we're feeding people, but that it can change lives and actually make a difference, and that you can reach someone through their community. There's so many layers that I think are really well explored in this film. But I'm, again, maybe you already had several different, people who were volunteers, but, what were some of your challenges in juggling the different moving parts, coordinating where filmmakers needed to be, and really following Jose and the World Central Kitchen team around the globe, to know, okay, today we're over here, today we're in the Bahamas, today we're back in Washington, or whatever, what are some of the challenges in that regard?
Well, to that point, you didn't really know necessarily where they were going to be. It was very much being able to react. So we had a fantastic production team. Our producing partner, Walt Matheson, was on the front lines and literally embedded with the organization. I mean, at times he actually put his camera down to help serve food. So he was always very close to the action, close to Jose, knowing where they might end up. And Jose, I mean, someone should put like a tracking device on him, because the amount of travel he ends up doing to drop into these activations is really remarkable. And we were just able to keep up with him because we had small teams. Where I think it was even more of a challenge, as Sara had said earlier, was all that footage coming back into the edit and figuring out really what our A storyline is going to be, what our B storyline is going to be. Where do you start the movie? Where do you end the movie? And that really, was a bit of a moving target. That really was about getting as much material in the edit as possible. And Ron and ourselves and the story team could really look at that and start to see, okay, what's the natural arc of this film going to be?
And our amazing editor, we have to give a shout out to Andy Moriali, who really come through. Also Gladys Murphy, but Andy, was really the one coming through and sifting through probably 1,000 hours of footage, at least, just from the organization.
What are the conversations that you need to have with Nate and with, other World Central Kitchen stakeholders, or even just the volunteers, in terms of how much you really want to show and are allowed to, pull back the curtain on their operation?
They were really open to us, surprisingly. I mean, there really weren't any restrictions. I think they were just used to having people trail them. And Jose, to his credit, there was not anything that he really flagged as, off limits. Mm-hmm. And even the fact that we were able to film with his family ultimately, I think really, shows how open he was to us, and really to Ron. I think he had great trust in Ron. So I don't believe we really had any restrictions. Our only restrictions were really, just the challenges of the pandemic and being able to be out there, which our team was, obviously able to do.
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously one of the big turning points in the movie of, like, obviously the whole story in some ways has to change on a dime, and how do we then incorporate this into the story? How long were you guys shut down, and how did you then work to come back in order to continue filming because you knew they were going to be on the ground doing this. I think it's really refreshing to see Jose in some ways leading the conversation, leading the recovery for so many of these businesses. But you guys, I'm sure, are in real time trying to figure out, how do we then come back? How do we keep our crew safe? How do we keep them safe? Yeah, take me through that.
I mean, somewhat remarkably, in hindsight, we never did shut down. You know, other Imagine productions shut down, our scripted productions shut down, even some of our doc productions slowed down. We never shut this one down because the story was in some ways just starting with COVID. It was a new challenge that World Central Kitchen was facing. And you see it in the movie. I mean, Jose goes to that, I think it was first in Japan, and then I think in Long Beach, where there was a cruise ship that had pulled up. We kind of forget about that now. It was such a long time ago. Remember, that was like literally that first week of the outbreak before anybody even knew what was going on. And then very shortly thereafter, they go to Navajo Nation, which is in the film, which is, you know, one of the most hardest hits area, at least initially in the country. And then obviously New York City. So our team stuck with them, obviously following as many protocols as were being put in place on the fly, because it was even ahead of the CDC or any of the guilds coming out and saying, this is, you know, wear this mask or don't wear that mask, or here's what you have to do. So everyone was kind of making it up, you know, to the best of their ability. Many people got COVID along the way. Fortunately, our team remained relatively healthy, as did World Central Kitchen. But that was the biggest challenge of the movie, was not shutting down and just keeping the story going. And then eventually, you know, it started to normalize a little bit as more productions came online. But we were always in some ways one step ahead of it. In some cases, knew more because of our work with World Central Kitchen, because they were getting more information from the government, CDC, other, you know, first responders on how to handle, you know, sort of in real time, the impact of the virus.
What have really been the reactions to the film thus far? You know, and even how has it helped maybe enable the work that World Central Kitchen is doing? What is it? What have been the changes that they've noticed, you know, in just the last couple weeks?
I think it's the power of Disney, the power of Disney Plus. Obviously, our fantastic partners at Nat Geo Documentary Films and Disney Plus, and the film is also streaming on Hulu. I think it's, you know, hopefully done wonders to help raise their profile. We were even able to set up screenings in the Ukraine, which is really quite exciting for the relief workers. So the people who were volunteering on the ground in the Ukraine were able to see this film, and, you know, hopefully it inspired them, energized them, reminded them why they were, you know, sacrificing and doing what they were doing. So far we're getting, you know, great response.
Yeah, and look, I would say Sara and I are both guilty, as many of our other documentary filmmaking colleagues, but documentarians tend to focus on dark, sad, sometimes challenging subjects. It's just in our nature. You know, we tend to be a depressed folk, but it's kind of nice to work on a movie that has a happy ending, or a happy-ish ending, that's celebratory, and that's inspiring. And I think certainly looking at current crop of films that are out there right now, I think this film has struck a particular chord because it is inspiring and it is uplifting, and it shows the power of volunteerism. It shows the power of what you as an individual can do when you, again, think that, oh, that's happening across the world, that's on my TV set. No, I can actually go out there and I can make a difference. And it shows the impact that people can still have in a very positive way on the planet, you know, when we're just faced with so much adversity. And look, those are the kind of movies that Ron Howard historically likes to make, you know, movies that are challenging, but that can bring you up. And it's been great to see just how much of a positive response we've gotten, but even more importantly, that the organization has gotten. And this honor, it's always, you know, wonderful to be nominated for your work, but we've always looked at it as this is a nomination for World Central Kitchen.
Yeah.
This is a way of, you know, our community shining a light on the great work that they're doing.
And I will say, you know, for as inspiring and as, you know, galvanizing as it is, you know, this could have been a very glossy sort of doc and just look at, oh, this is so great, and this is great people doing great things, but it really, you know, gives you a good look at who Jose is as a person, and that he is a CEO. He is a top, you know, he's got a vision, and, you know, sometimes there's a little like friction there with some of these, you know, employees at times, but he's he's a very strong leader and knows, how to get, and I think, it's very well edited in that sense, and just the urgency of the film at times. It's great work. So again, but well, I mean, are there new challenges that World Central Kitchen is facing in Ukraine that don't, working in a war zone versus something affected by a hurricane, now what are the new dilemmas that they have to go through, and yeah.
Well, I mean, I think without, totally being able probably to communicate for the organization, I do think you hit it. I mean, I think for the first time, they're in an active war zone, an active conflict zone, and that is not something that they were ever kind of experiencing prior. So I think they are bombarded with the struggles, the challenges that the Ukrainian people are on a daily basis over there. I mean, we've had several phone calls, Zooms with members of the organization, and they're like, forgive us if we have to jump off mid Zoom, but they're bombing, we can hear the bombs down the street, or, we can hear this in the background. So I think it is a very real challenge for them. But I mean, you have to just commend them for being so persistent, for being so committed to being there. And doing what they can to make sure people are being fed. And I think the other thing that came out of this is, and it's starting to get some, I think, press attention, is just how much of our global food supply, particularly wheat, comes out of that region. So that's, all being obviously very affected by this conflict. So I think also World Central Kitchen is looking at, food instability kind of overall as an issue that they are starting to really tackle. So they're, on the ground, I think being able to sort of educate just, the global system in general on what they're experiencing.
Okay. Justin, this year, or start of this year, your role was expanded at the company at Imagine. And, I wonder, how does a film like We Feed People really fit into your overall vision of Imagine going forward?
Projects like this and a lot of the other docs that we're doing have just been fantastic, because it's just showed how the Imagine brand can really be translated into nonfiction as seamlessly as it has been historically with fiction. And if you look back, the history of the company and the work that Ron and Brian have been responsible for, more often than not, it's based on true stories. If you go back to Apollo 13 or Frost Nixon, Beautiful Mind, even Backdraft was inspired by an article, about real firemen, and Friday Night Lights, and so many of the titles that they've been drawn to have focused on real people or true stories. And so nonfiction and premium docs, when Sara and I started this division now just about 4 years ago, was a very sort of natural extension of that. And now what we're finding, Ron being one of the more notable examples, but more narrative filmmakers that are interested in crossing over into docs, and more doc filmmakers that are crossing over into narrative. And a big part of my mandate going forward in this chief strategy officer role is really finding those creative opportunities, that creative cross-pollination all across the company. So is there a doc that we're doing where maybe we've optioned an underlying IP, or we're following a certain story that can now lend itself for scripted television, or for a film, let's say. We just a few weeks ago announced a strategic partnership with the Washington Post, which was really exciting for us, because it's now given us, across the whole company, not just docs, access to all that IP, all those great stories that they have in the vault, all the stories that are being published in the paper on a daily basis, and then stories that haven't even come out yet that are ongoing investigations. And that just feeds into this great sort of creative studio that we've put together here. So it's an exciting time, and this, there's a cadence to documentaries, because they can typically be made sometimes faster than a narrative film, faster than certainly a scripted series. Usually the development process for one is a lot shorter. We have 10, 12 titles a year now that are coming out just on the non-scripted side, on top of our scripted endeavors. And it's just, again, put the company out there in such an exciting way that it becomes a magnet for a lot of creative talent that want to embody that same that same ecosystem.
And that's really interesting that you're seeing that crossover talent more so even. I mean, is there something else that's lent itself to that, of why, people who have never tackled a documentary before are wanting to, jump into that space, or vice versa, and how you guys are able to enable that?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think there's been filmmakers, narrative filmmakers, who historically have also been working in docs. Martin Scorsese is an example of that. We're doing a doc with him right now. Judd Apatow has done that. Sara, was his producer on a number of projects. Amy Poehler, just did it with Lucy and Desi, which is our friendly competition in the same category as We Feed People. And I think overall, though, I think there's been such a rise in the popularity of docs and premium docs, because on these streaming platforms, there's no differentiation between a great doc and a great narrative film. They're both thumbnails living next to each other. If you go to the Disney site right now, you go to Disney Plus, We Feed People's there, and The Mandalorian, is right next to it. So for a consumer, all of us, we just have access to it. And I think that's also inspired a lot of traditionally maybe narrative filmmakers or writers to see docs as something that they can also participate in, and now they're interested in, because like the whole tide has risen in that sense.
I mean, Sara, in that same vein, what are the projects that you now want to pursue in the wake of doing something like this? Or, what other conversations are you having with Ron in terms of where his attention is going to go next?
Yeah, no, I mean, look, I think the beauty of doing a project like We Feed People is that it does elevate the mission of World Central Kitchen. It humanizes it. It makes people walk in the people's shoes that they see sort of affected by these disasters. And there's a global platform for it. And I think it's great when you have someone like Ron Howard, who, naturally will bring attention to a project because of his stature. I think we do it with other filmmakers, documentary filmmakers as well, if it's a big enough subject that can be eventized. So I think for us, for me, for the doc unit, I think it's only inspiring us to look for more projects like We Feed People and try to think, well, how can we package those projects so that we can elevate the mission behind them? And I think for Ron, particularly, we're very excited that, we announced that he's going to be directing a documentary about Jim Henson next, which is going to be fantastic and, really, really exciting. We'll be working with Disney Plus on that one. But I think he is always thinking about, well, what is his next, as he likes to say, sort of real person project. I think he's really caught sort of the verite bug between Rebuilding Paradise and We Feed People. So we're always thinking about, well, what is the next issue that he can amplify? And I think the more that we can do that as Imagine, the better, because I think we do have that ability to help elevate, subjects, issues, and topics that, are really affecting the world today.
Okay. What are some of the things that you want people to take away after they've seen this film, and whether it's challenges about making it, or just something that you learned in the process or in watching it? Sara, yeah, or go ahead. Or
no, I was just going to say, it goes back to
we're probably going to say the same thing.
Yeah, I think it's volunteerism. I think
yes.
I think there's so much that we can do and we need to do, especially given all the challenges that we're facing right now as a country and as a planet, where you can make a difference. Somebody can make a difference. That one meal that gets served to somebody changes that person's day and maybe their life. And there's something very inspiring about that working with Jose and on this film in particular completely transformed my outlook on what's possible.
Has he cooked for you guys? Has Jose, he
has not cooked for us one-on-one yet.
No.
But what I will say is we went to the screening that we did in Washington, DC at the Portrait Gallery, and they had one of those massive paella pans. So
yeah,
they cooked for everyone who was at the screening. So I will tell people that he cooked for us, but about 600.
Fortunately, we can go to his restaurants too.
Exactly.
So the catering needs to be good when you're
It was
doing these
pretty damn
awards.
good paella. I mean, considering how many people they made it for, it was pretty.
You know, you will eat well.
Yeah,
Beats the MREs. You're not,
exactly.
Without
Wow.
a doubt.
Well, thank you both, Justin and Sarah. This is a fantastic film, and congratulations again, and best of luck at the Emmys.
Thank you so much. Appreciate the time, Brian. Thank you.